"I'll be gentle," he whispered against her skin, his voice rough with barely contained desire. "I promise I'll go slow." But when Alessandro De Luca saw the crimson stain spreading across the white Egyptian cotton sheets of his penthouse bedroom, when he realized what Sophia's trembling silence had been hiding all along, something inside his carefully constructed world shattered completely. The billionaire who controlled empires, who made grown men nervous with a single glance, found himself frozen, his hands shaking, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Because in that moment he understood that what had started as a simple arrangement, a cold contract to satisfy his dying grandfather's wish for an heir, had become something far more dangerous, far more real. If you want to discover how a forced marriage between strangers transformed into a love so intense it changed both their lives forever, subscribe to the channel right now. Leave a like if you believe that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. And tell me in the comments what country you're listening from. Your presence here means everything, and this story was made for hearts like yours. The Mediterranean sun blazed mercilessly over the ancient villa in Positano, turning the Tyrrhenian Sea into a sheet of liquid gold that hurt to look at directly. The scent of lemon groves and bougainvillea hung heavy in the air, mixing with the salt spray from waves crashing against the cliffs below. It should have been paradise, but for Sophia Moretti, standing in the small changing room of the villa's chapel, it felt like a beautiful prison. Her hands trembled as she tried to fasten the buttons of the wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that probably cost more than her family's entire house, in the poor neighborhood of Naples where she'd grown up. The dress was exquisite, perfectly tailored to her slender frame, but it felt like a costume, like she was playing a role in someone else's story. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of guests gathering, the elite of Italian and international society, people whose names appeared in financial magazines and society columns, people who lived in a world so far removed from hers it might as well have been another planet. She caught her reflection in the full-length mirror and barely recognized herself. The girl staring back looked elegant, sophisticated. Her dark hair swept up in an intricate style that had taken the hairdresser 2 hours to create, her face expertly made up to highlight her large brown eyes and delicate features. But beneath the expensive facade, she was still just Sophia, the girl who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school, who'd grown up sharing a tiny apartment with her widowed mother and 2 younger brothers, who'd never imagined she'd end up here, about to marry one of the wealthiest men in Europe, a man she'd met exactly 3 times before this day, a man whose cold gray eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her, a man who'd made it painfully clear that this marriage was nothing more than a business transaction. The memory of their first meeting still made her stomach twist with humiliation. 3 months ago, she'd been working a night shift at the public hospital in Naples, exhausted after 14 hours on her feet, when her mother had called with news that had turned her world upside down. Her younger brother Marco needed surgery, expensive surgery that their family could never afford, a procedure that might save his life, or at least give him a chance at a normal future. Sophia had spent that entire night researching options, applying for loans she knew she'd never get, feeling helpless and desperate in a way that made her want to scream. And then, as if summoned by her desperation, Alessandro De Luca's lawyer had appeared at the hospital 2 days later with an offer that seemed too surreal to be real. The De Luca family needed a bride for Alessandro, the lawyer had explained in a crisp, business-like tone that made the whole thing sound like a corporate merger. The old patriarch, Vittorio De Luca, was dying, and his final wish was to see his grandson married, to know that the family line would continue, that there would be an heir to carry on the De Luca legacy. Alessandro, who'd built his own empire in international finance and real estate, who'd spent the last decade focused solely on business after a devastating betrayal by his ex-fiancée, had refused every attempt at matchmaking, rejected every suitable woman his grandfather had suggested. So Vittorio had taken matters into his own hands. The deal was simple, brutal in its clarity. Sofia would marry Alessandro, live with him for 1 year, provide him with an heir if possible, and in exchange, her brother would receive the best medical care available. Her family would be financially secure for life, and she herself would receive a sum of money that would ensure she never had to worry about anything again. After 1 year, if both parties agreed, they could divorce quietly, and she would be free to live her life however she chose. Sofia had wanted to refuse, had wanted to throw the offer back in the lawyer's face, because the whole thing felt wrong, like she was being bought, like her body and her future were just commodities to be traded. But then she'd thought of Marco, barely 16, whose bright smile had been dimming with pain, whose future was being stolen by an illness he'd done nothing to deserve. She'd thought of her mother, who'd worked herself to exhaustion for years, trying to give her children a better life, who was aging faster than she should because of stress and worry. And she'd realized that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, that her dignity was a small price to pay for her family's survival. So she'd said yes, had signed the papers with shaking hands, had agreed to become a stranger's wife. Their second meeting had been the formal introduction at the De Luca family estate, a massive villa outside Rome that looked like something from a Renaissance painting. Alessandro had been exactly what she'd expected. Tall, devastatingly handsome in that cold, perfect way of men who'd been born to wealth and power, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than a car. His gray eyes had swept over her with the same assessment one might give a piece of furniture being considered for purchase, and when he'd spoken, his voice had been polite, distant, completely devoid of warmth. "This arrangement benefits both of us," he'd said. "I need to fulfill my grandfather's wish, and you need financial security for your family. Let's be clear about expectations. This is a business contract, nothing more. I don't expect affection or romance. I expect discretion, cooperation, and at the end of the year, an amicable separation." Sofia had nodded, had agreed to everything, had told herself that she could do this, that 1 year of her life was a small sacrifice. But now, standing in this changing room, about to walk down the aisle to a man who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end, she felt the full weight of what she'd agreed to pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened to reveal an older woman, elegant and poised, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see too much. Maria, the housekeeper who'd been with the De Luca family for 40 years, entered carrying a small velvet box. "Signorina Sofia," she said gently, her accent thick with the warmth of southern Italy. "Don Vittorio asked me to give you this." She opened the box to reveal a necklace, an antique piece with a single perfect emerald, surrounded by diamonds that caught the light and threw green fire across the walls. "It was Alessandro's grandmother's," Maria explained. "Don Vittorio said it should be worn by the next De Luca bride. It's tradition." Sofia's eyes stung with unexpected tears as Maria fastened the necklace around her throat. The weight of it, the history it carried, made everything feel more real, more permanent. "Thank you," she whispered. Maria's weathered hands lingered on her shoulders, and when Sofia met her eyes in the mirror, she saw understanding there, and something that looked like sympathy. "He's not as cold as he seems," the older woman said quietly. "Alessandro, I mean. Life has made him hard, but underneath, He's still the boy I helped raise. Give him time." Sophia wanted to laugh at that, wanted to explain that time wasn't going to change anything, that in 1 year she'd be gone, that this was all just an elaborate performance. But she just nodded, accepting the kindness even if she didn't believe the words behind it. The ceremony was a blur. Sophia walked down the aisle on the arm of Alessandro's uncle, since her own family hadn't been invited, this being strictly a society affair. Her mother and brothers watching from Naples via a video link that the De Luca family had arranged. She was aware of hundreds of eyes on her, of whispered conversations, of the way people assessed her like they were trying to figure out how someone like her had ended up here. But mostly she was aware of Alessandro, waiting for her at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his tailored black tuxedo, his face an unreadable mask. When she reached him, when she placed her hand in his, she was surprised by how warm his skin was, how his fingers, despite everything, held hers gently rather than gripping with the cold possession she'd expected. The priest's words washed over her in a stream of Latin and Italian, traditional phrases about love and commitment and forever that felt like mockery given the circumstances. When it came time for the vows, Alessandro's voice was steady, clear, giving nothing away. Sophia's own voice trembled slightly, but she made it through, surprised at how easily the lies came, how naturally she could promise to love and honor a man she barely knew. And then Alessandro was lifting her veil, his gray eyes meeting hers for a brief moment, before he leaned in to seal their marriage with a kiss. It was supposed to be brief, perfunctory, just for show. But when his lips touched hers, something unexpected happened. A jolt of electricity ran through her body, sharp and startling, and she felt Alessandro freeze too, his hand that had come up to cup her face tightening slightly. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it felt longer, felt like some kind of recognition passing between them. And when they pulled apart, Sophia saw surprise in his eyes, quickly hidden behind his usual cool expression. The reception was held in the villa's garden, hundreds of guests mingling among flowering trees and marble fountains, champagne flowing freely, a small orchestra playing classical pieces that drifted through the evening air. Sophia moved through it all in a daze, accepting congratulations from people whose names she immediately forgot, smiling until her face hurt, very aware of Alessandro beside her, his hand occasionally at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. He played his part perfectly, the attentive groom, but she could feel the distance in every touch, the calculation behind every gesture. This was all performance, all carefully orchestrated theater for the benefit of his grandfather and society. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful to be real, Don Vittorio himself approached them. The old man was in a wheelchair, his body frail, but his eyes still sharp, still carrying the force of a personality that had built one of Italy's greatest fortunes. He gestured for them to come closer, and both Alessandro and Sophia bent to hear him. "You've made an old man very happy," he said, his voice weak but warm. "Alessandro, you've finally done something right. This one," he gestured to Sophia with a trembling hand. "She has good eyes. Kind eyes. Don't waste this chance." Alessandro's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded respectfully. "I won't disappoint you, Nonno." Vittorio turned his gaze to Sophia, and she felt pinned by it. Like he could see right through all her pretenses to the scared girl underneath. "Take care of him, child," the old man said. "He needs someone to remind him that money isn't everything, that legacy isn't just about empires and heirs. It's about love, about family, about building something that lasts beyond balance sheets." Sophia found herself nodding, feeling the weight of expectations she hadn't asked for settling on her shoulders. "I'll try," she said, and was surprised to realize she meant it, at least in some small way. The old man smiled, patted her hand, and was wheeled away by his nurse, leaving Sophia and Alessandro standing together in the fading light. As the evening wore on, as the guests gradually departed, Sophia felt a growing sense of dread building in her chest. Because she knew what came next, what was expected on a wedding night, and despite all the clinical conversations she'd had with herself about this being just an arrangement, about separating emotion from physical acts, she couldn't stop the anxiety that made her hands shake. Finally, mercifully, the last guests left. The villa staff began clearing away the remnants of the celebration, and Alessandro turned to her, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the garden lanterns. "We should go," he said simply. His driver took them to Alessandro's primary residence, a stunning penthouse in the heart of Rome that occupied the entire top floor of a building he owned. The space was masculine, modern, all clean lines and expensive materials, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that took her breath away. But Sophia barely noticed the luxury around her. Too focused on the pounding of her heart, the way her stomach twisted with nerves. Alessandro poured himself a scotch from a crystal decanter, then seemed to remember his manners and turned to her. "Would you like something? Wine? Water?" "No, thank you," Sophia managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a crack in the cool facade. "You're terrified," he said, and it wasn't a question. Sophia wanted to deny it, wanted to pretend she was fine, sophisticated, unaffected. But she was exhausted from the day, from weeks of stress and fear, and the words came out before she could stop them. "Wouldn't you be? This whole day, this whole situation, it's completely surreal. I feel like I'm watching someone else's life from the outside." Something that might have been understanding flickered across Alessandro's face. He set down his glass and moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that made her dizzy. "Listen to me," he said, his voice lower, gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I know this isn't ideal. I know you're here because you had no other choice, because you needed to save your brother. I'm not going to pretend this is some fairy tale, but I'm also not a monster. We have expectations to meet, yes, but not tonight. You're exhausted, you're scared, and frankly, the last thing I want is to be with someone who's frightened of me." Relief flooded through Sophia so intensely she felt her knees weaken. "You mean we don't have to, tonight? We can just sleep," Alessandro finished. "Yes, we can just sleep. Or, rather, you can sleep. I have work to do anyway." He gestured toward a hallway. "The master bedroom is through there. You'll find everything you need. I'll take one of the guest rooms." Sophia stared at him, trying to reconcile this unexpected kindness with the cold businessman she'd thought she'd married. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than he could know. He nodded, already turning away, retreating behind his walls. "Get some rest, Sophia. Tomorrow we'll discuss the practical arrangements of this situation." She found the master bedroom, a space dominated by an enormous bed and more floor-to-ceiling windows showing the glittering city below. Someone, probably Maria, had already unpacked her few belongings, hanging her simple clothes in a closet the size of her childhood bedroom. She showered in the marble bathroom, washing away the makeup and hairspray and the weight of the day, then pulled on the simple cotton nightgown she'd brought, rejecting the elaborate silk negligee that had been part of the trousseau the De Luca family had provided. When she finally lay down in the massive bed, she'd expected to stay awake for hours, her mind spinning. But exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, pulling her down into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back. Married. She was married. She was now Sofia De Luca, at least for the next year. The thought made her stomach clench. She found Alessandro in the kitchen, dressed casually in jeans and a white linen shirt that somehow made him look more intimidating than the formal suits. His hair slightly damp from a shower. He was reading something on a tablet while drinking espresso, and he looked up when she entered, his gray eyes sweeping over her in a way that made her suddenly aware of how thin her nightgown was, how exposed she felt. "Good morning," he said neutrally. "There's coffee, and Maria will be here soon to make breakfast." "Thank you," Sofia said, pouring herself a cup with hands that weren't quite steady. They stood there in awkward silence, two strangers who were now legally bound, neither quite sure how to navigate this bizarre situation. Finally, Alessandro set down his tablet. "We need to establish some ground rules," he said. "This year will be easier if we're clear about expectations." Sofia nodded, grateful for the structure, the boundaries. "First," he continued, "in public, we maintain the appearance of a normal marriage, attend events together, show appropriate affection, nothing excessive but enough to avoid gossip. Second, in private, you have your space, and I have mine. I won't intrude on your privacy unless necessary. Third, regarding the expectation of an heir," his jaw tightened slightly, "we can discuss that when you're ready. There's no immediate pressure. And finally, at the end of the year, assuming we've both fulfilled our obligations, we part ways amicably. No drama, no complications. Does that sound reasonable?" Sofia listened to him lay out the terms of their shared life like he was negotiating a business contract, which she supposed he was. "It sounds fair," she agreed, though she had one question that had been nagging at her. "What am I supposed to do all day? I'm used to working, to having purpose. I can't just sit in this beautiful prison doing nothing." Alessandro looked surprised, as if the question had never occurred to him. "You're welcome to continue your nursing work if you'd like," he said after a moment, "or pursue other interests. I'm not your jailer, Sofia. I have no interest in controlling your daily activities. Just be discreet. Don't do anything that would cause scandal or reflect poorly on the family name." Sofia felt a spark of defiance at that. "So, I'm free to live my life as long as I don't embarrass you." Alessandro's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's not what I said. I meant, just be aware that everything you do now reflects on both of us. It's not about control, it's about reality. We're in this together, whether we like it or not. The first month of marriage was strange, surreal, like living in a beautiful museum where she was afraid to touch anything. Sofia did return to work, taking a position at a private hospital that Alessandro's connections had arranged, and the routine of nursing, of helping people, of having a purpose beyond being a decorative wife, kept her sane. Alessandro was rarely home, consumed by his business empire, traveling constantly. When they were together, usually at required social events, they maintained their careful distance, polite and civil, but never warm, never real. He was an attentive escort, always had his hand at her back, always made sure she was comfortable, but it was all performance, all carefully controlled. But something began to shift, slowly, imperceptibly at first. It started with small things. Sofia would come home exhausted from a difficult shift, and she'd find that Alessandro had left instructions for the cook to prepare her favorite foods, even though she'd only mentioned them once in passing. He began asking about her day, actually listening when she talked about her patients, her challenges, showing a genuine interest that surprised her. and she noticed things about him too. The way he rubbed his temples when he was stressed. The way his shoulders carried tension that never quite released. The loneliness that lived in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. One evening, about 6 weeks into their marriage, Sophia came home to find Alessandro on the terrace, staring out at the city with a glass of wine in his hand, his posture radiating exhaustion. She hesitated, then grabbed another glass and joined him, pouring wine for herself and sitting in the chair next to his. They sat in silence for a while, watching the lights of Rome twinkle below them. "Bad day?" she finally asked. Alessandro glanced at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his face, as if he hadn't expected her to care. "You could say that," he replied. "A deal I've been working on for months fell through. Cost the company millions." "I'm sorry," Sophia said, and meant it. He turned to look at her more fully, really look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You know what's strange?" he said, his voice quieter, less guarded than usual. "I've had business setbacks before, bigger ones. But this is the first time I've come home and had someone to tell about it. The first time it felt like there was a reason to leave the office, something waiting besides empty rooms and silence." Sophia's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I know what you mean," she admitted. "This place, this life, it should feel foreign and wrong. And it does, sometimes. But other times, it feels like maybe I could belong here. Maybe we could figure out how to coexist as more than just strangers playing roles." Alessandro studied her, and the intensity in his gaze made heat bloom across her skin. "When I married you," he said slowly, carefully, like he was choosing each word with precision, "I told myself it was purely practical, a means to an end, nothing more. I was so certain I could keep everything compartmentalized, business and personal completely separate. But you, Sophia, you're not what I expected. You're not like anyone I've ever known." Sophia's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "You're real," he said simply. "In a world where everyone wants something from me, where every interaction is calculated, you just exist without pretense. You care about your patients. You call your mother every night to check on your brothers. You leave notes for the staff thanking them for small kindnesses. You're genuine in a way that's completely foreign to my world, and I find myself drawn to that, to you, in ways I didn't plan for, didn't want." The confession hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. Sophia knew she should retreat, should maintain the boundaries they'd established, should protect herself from the inevitable hurt that would come from letting herself care about a man who'd made it clear this was temporary. But she was tired of being careful. Tired of pretending she didn't feel the pull between them that had been building since that unexpected jolt during their wedding kiss. "I'm drawn to you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be. I know it's foolish, but I can't help it." "You're not who I thought you'd be either." Alessandro set down his wine glass and stood, moving to where she sat. He extended his hand to her, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They stood close, closer than they'd ever been when not performing for an audience, and Sophia could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the pulse beating at his throat. "I want to kiss you," Alessandro said, his voice rough with want. "Not for show, not for anyone's benefit but ours. But I need you to want it too, to choose it freely. Tell me to stop, and I will. We'll go back to our separate rooms and pretend this conversation never happened." Sophia knew she should tell him to stop, knew she was risking everything by crossing this line. But she'd been playing it safe her whole life, always choosing duty over desire, always putting others first. For once, just this once, she wanted to choose something for herself, even if it was reckless, even if it would hurt later. Don't stop, she whispered, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like their brief wedding ceremony touch. This was hungry, desperate, weeks of tension and denial pouring out in the slide of lips and tongue. Alessandro's hands came up to frame her face, holding her like she was precious, like she was something he'd been searching for without knowing it. Sophia's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, drowning in sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alessandro rested his forehead against hers. "I want you," he said simply. "I've wanted you since the moment you walked down that aisle looking terrified and brave at the same time. But I need you to be sure, Sophia. Once we cross this line, I don't know if I can go back to pretending indifference." Sophia's heart was racing, her body alive with want in a way she'd never experienced. She was 24 years old, had been so focused on survival and family and duty that she'd never had time for romance, for passion. She'd never been touched by a man, had never wanted to be, until now. Until Alessandro had somehow gotten under her skin and made her crave things she'd never let herself imagine. "There's something you should know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I haven't." She couldn't quite form the words, embarrassment flooding her cheeks with heat. Alessandro pulled back slightly to look at her, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're a virgin," he said softly, and it wasn't a question. Sophia nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "I know it's probably strange at my age, but between school and work and taking care of my family, there was never time for relationships, never anyone I trusted enough or wanted enough to." She trailed off, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Alessandro's hand came up to cup her face, tilting it so she had to look at him. "There's nothing strange about it," he said firmly. "And knowing this, knowing I'd be your first, that changes everything. I won't rush you, Sophia. We can take this as slowly as you need. We can stop right now if you want. But the thought that you would trust me with something so precious, it humbles me in ways I can't quite express." "Do you want this?" Sophia asked, needing to hear him say it clearly. "Want you?" Alessandro laughed, a sound with an edge of desperation. "I want you so much I can barely think straight. But I want you willing, eager, not just agreeing because you think it's expected." "I am willing," Sophia said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "I want this, want you. I'm nervous, terrified actually, but I want to know what it feels like to be touched by someone I'm choosing, someone who sees me as more than just an obligation." Alessandro's eyes darkened with heat, and something deeper, something that looked almost like tenderness. "Then let me show you," he murmured, and kissed her again. Softer this time, but no less intense. He took her hand and led her to the master bedroom, the space they'd both been avoiding, treating it like neutral territory. The room was bathed in soft light from the city below, creating an intimate cocoon that made Sophia's nervousness spike even as desire pooled low in her belly. Alessandro moved slowly, deliberately, giving her time to adjust, to change her mind if she wanted. He helped her out of her simple dress with gentle hands, his eyes never leaving hers, watching for any sign of hesitation. When she stood before him in just her simple underwear, she fought the urge to cover herself, to hide from his intense gaze. "You're beautiful," he said, reverence in his voice that made tears prick at her eyes. "So beautiful it hurts to look at you." Then he was removing his own clothes, revealing a body that was all lean muscle and controlled power, and Sophia felt her mouth go dry with want and fear combined. They lay down together on the enormous bed, and Alessandro took his time, mapping her body with hands and mouth, finding sensitive places she hadn't known existed, building heat and need, until she was trembling beneath him. He kept his promise, was gentle, patient, constantly checking that she was okay, that she wanted to continue. And when he finally joined their bodies, when she felt the sharp pain that made her gasp and tense, he held her close, whispered soothing words against her hair, waited until she adjusted before moving. "I'll be gentle," Alessandro murmured against her ear, his body perfectly still, despite the tension she could feel thrumming through him. "I promise I'll go slow. Tell me if it's too much, if you need me to stop." But Sophia didn't want him to stop, didn't want gentleness anymore. She wanted to feel everything, wanted to surrender to this connection that was so much more than she'd expected. "Move," she whispered, wrapping her legs around his hips, pulling him deeper. "Please, Alessandro." And so he did. Slow at first, achingly careful, but as her pain transformed into pleasure, as she began to move with him, seeking friction and release, he let go of some of his rigid control. They made love through the night, Alessandro taking her again and again, as if he couldn't get enough, as if he was trying to memorize every inch of her skin, every sound she made. It was near dawn when they finally collapsed together, exhausted and tangled in sheets that Sophia realized with a delayed shock were stained with her blood. She froze, staring at the evidence of her lost innocence spread across the expensive fabric, and felt something like panic flutter in her chest. But Alessandro, following her gaze, went completely still in a different way. His whole body tensed, and when she looked at his face, she saw something that took her breath away. Not disgust or regret, but raw emotion, something almost like anguish mixed with wonder. "Sophia," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "God, what have we done? What have I done?" Confusion and hurt lanced through her. "Do you regret it?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "No," Alessandro said immediately, fiercely, pulling her against him. "No, that's not. Seeing this, knowing I was your first, knowing that I've tied you to me in a way that can't be undone." His hands were shaking where they gripped her shoulders. "I told myself I could keep this clinical, business-like, that at the end of the year, we could just walk away from each other. But looking at you now, knowing what we just shared, I realize I was lying to myself. I don't want to let you go, Sophia. I don't think I can." The confession made Sophia's heart stutter in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this stopped being an arrangement somewhere along the way," Alessandro admitted, his gray eyes burning with intensity as he looked at her. "I'm saying that I'm mauling for you, maybe have been since the wedding, since before. I'm saying that the thought of you walking away in 11 months feels like it would destroy me. I don't know when it happened, when you became essential instead of convenient, but you have. You've gotten under my skin, into my head, and I don't know what to do with these feelings because I swore I'd never let anyone have this kind of power over me again." Sophia felt tears sliding down her cheeks, overwhelmed by his words, by the vulnerability he was showing her. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered. "I tried not to, tried to keep my distance, but you make it impossible. When you look at me like I matter, like I'm more than just a means to an end, I feel seen in a way I never have before. I'm terrified, Alessandro, because I know how this could hurt, how loving you could break me. But I can't seem to stop myself." Alessandro kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she tasted salt from tears. She wasn't sure were hers or his. "We're both terrified," he said against her lips. "But maybe we can be terrified together. Maybe we can figure out how to make this real, not just for a year, but for always." The next weeks were a revelation. They couldn't keep their hands off each other, making love in every room of the penthouse, learning each other's bodies, with an intensity that left them both shaken. But it wasn't just physical. They talked for hours, sharing histories and dreams, fears and hopes. Alessandro told her about his ex-fiancée, the woman who'd betrayed him, who'd been sleeping with his business partner while wearing his ring, who'd made him believe love was just another commodity to be traded. Sophia told him about growing up poor, about the shame and pride that came with poverty, about watching her mother work herself to exhaustion and vowing to make a different life. They fell into a rhythm, a life together that felt surprisingly natural. Sophia continued her nursing work, and Alessandro began adjusting his schedule to be home more, to have dinner with her, to fall asleep next to her instead of in his study. They attended charity galas and business events together, but now the touches were real, the smiles genuine. People noticed the change, commented on how happy Alessandro seemed, how lucky Sophia was. If they only knew, she sometimes thought, that this fairy tale had started as a cold transaction, that they'd somehow alchemized business into love. It was 2 months after their wedding night when Sophia started feeling different. She was exhausted all the time, her breasts were tender, and certain smells made her nauseous. At first, she attributed it to stress, to the changes in her life. But when her period was a week late, then 2, a suspicion began to grow that she couldn't ignore. She bought a pregnancy test on her way home from work, smuggling it into the penthouse like contraband, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. In the privacy of the bathroom, she waited for the results, 3 minutes that felt like hours. And when the 2 pink lines appeared, clear and undeniable, her hand started shaking so badly she nearly dropped the test. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Alessandro's child, with an heir to the De Luca fortune, the entire purpose of their arrangement fulfilled. Except it didn't feel like fulfilling a contract. It felt like a miracle and a complication all tangled together. She should be happy. She was happy, but she was also terrified. Because now everything was real in a way it hadn't been before. Now there was a tiny life depending on the fragile thing she and Alessandro had built. Now the stakes were impossibly high. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long time, trying to process, trying to figure out how to tell Alessandro what this meant for them. She found him in his study, working late as usual, his face illuminated by the glow of his computer screen. He looked up when she entered, and his expression immediately softened. "Kara, I didn't hear you come home. How was your shift?" Sophia's courage almost failed her. She stood in the doorway, the positive pregnancy test hidden in her pocket, words stuck in her throat. Alessandro's eyes narrowed with concern. "What's wrong? You're pale. Are you feeling all right?" "I need to tell you something," Sophia managed, her voice trembling. Alessandro immediately stood, crossing to her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You're scaring me. What is it? Are you sick? Did something happen at the hospital?" "I'm pregnant," Sophia said, and watched his face go through a rapid series of emotions. Shock, disbelief, wonder, something that looked like joy quickly followed by concern. We're going to have a baby?" Alessandro's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Sophia nodded, pulling the test from her pocket and showing him the evidence. It must have happened that first night, or shortly after. "I just found out today. I haven't been to a doctor yet, but these tests are usually accurate." Alessandro stared at the small plastic stick like it held the secrets of the universe. Then suddenly he was pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We're going to have a baby." "You sound happy," Sophia said, relief flooding through her. "I wasn't sure how you'd react." "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Alessandro said, pulling back to look at her, and she could see tears glistening in his eyes. Terrified, overwhelmed, completely unprepared. But yes, happy. So incredibly happy. This changes everything. You know that, right? Sophia nodded. I know. What was supposed to be temporary, what we were building together, now there's going to be a child involved. We can't just walk away from each other in 9 months like we planned. We won't, Alessandro said firmly. Sophia, even before this, I was trying to figure out how to ask you to stay, how to make this marriage real. This just makes it urgent. I want to be a family, a real family. I want to raise this child together. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. Will you stay? Will you give us a real chance? Tears were streaming down Sophia's face now. Happy tears, relieved tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll stay. I want to stay. I love you, Alessandro. I know it's fast. I know it's probably crazy. But I do. I love you. I love you too, he said, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. I think I've loved you since you walked into that cafe looking like a drowned kitten, but still trying to be strong. I just didn't know it yet. Didn't know what I was feeling. But I know now. You're mine, Sophia. You and this baby. You're my whole world. They held each other for a long time, processing the magnitude of what was happening, how much their lives were about to change. Finally, Alessandro pulled back, his business mind already planning. We need to get you to the best obstetrician, he said. And you should probably stop working such long shifts. The stress isn't good for you or the baby. Sophia laughed through her tears. I'm a nurse, Alessandro. I know what's safe and what isn't. I'm not fragile. I know, he said, but his hand came to rest protectively on her still flat stomach. But humor me, please. Let me take care of you, both of you. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sophia did cut back her hours at the hospital, partly because Alessandro worried, and partly because the exhaustion of the first trimester made 12-hour shifts nearly impossible. They told Don Vittorio, and the old man cried openly, holding Sophia's hand and thanking her for giving him the gift of a great-grandchild before he passed. He seemed to rally after the news, his health stabilizing in a way that defied his doctor's predictions, as if sheer will and joy were keeping him alive to meet the baby. Alessandro became almost comically overprotective. He read every pregnancy book he could find, drove Sophia's obstetrician crazy with questions, made sure the penthouse was baby-proofed months before it would be necessary. He talked to her stomach every night, telling their growing child stories about the family they'd be born into, the life they'd have, the love that was waiting for them. And he made love to Sophia with a reverence that sometimes brought tears to her eyes, worshiping her changing body, marveling at every new curve, every sign of the life they'd created together. It was in her 5th month, when she was just starting to show noticeably, that they decided to have a small ceremony, a real wedding with her family present. Not the elaborate society affair that had started this all, but something intimate and meaningful in the chapel at the Positano villa. Her mother cried throughout the entire ceremony, overwhelmed by joy and relief at seeing her daughter so obviously happy and loved. Her brothers, including Marco, who'd made a full recovery thanks to his surgery, stood up with Alessandro, accepting him into their family with a warmth that made the normally composed billionaire's voice break during his vows. This time, when Alessandro promised to love and cherish her, Sophia knew he meant every word. When she promised to stand by him through everything life brought, she felt the weight and beauty of that commitment. And when they kissed, it wasn't for show or obligation, it was pure celebration. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something real from a foundation of necessity. The reception was held in the villa's garden, just family and close friends. Maria fussing over everyone and making sure Sophia ate enough. Roberto toasting the couple with rough eloquence about the power of love to transform lives. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, Alessandro pulled Sophia into his arms for their first dance, swaying slowly to music that drifted through the warm evening air. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Sophia said, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was sacrificing myself for my family. I never dreamed I'd find everything I didn't know I needed." Alessandro's hand came to rest on her rounded belly, where their baby was growing strong and healthy. "You saved me," he said quietly. "I was so lost, so convinced that success and control were all that mattered. You showed me what it means to really live, to really love. You gave me a reason to be more than just a ruthless businessman. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret this," Sophia said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "You're my home, Alessandro. You and this baby. You're my whole world." The months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. They converted one of the penthouse's guest rooms into a nursery, Sophia insisting on helping, despite Alessandro's protests. They attended parenting classes together, Alessandro looking comically out of place among the other couples, but fiercely determined to learn everything he could. And as Sophia's due date approached, as her body grew heavy and uncomfortable, Alessandro was there for every moment, rubbing her swollen feet, supporting her through Braxton Hicks' contractions, reading to her when she couldn't sleep. Don Vittorio passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks before the baby was due, and while they grieved, there was also comfort in knowing he'd lived to see his grandson happily married, to know that the family line would continue. The funeral was enormous, hundreds of people paying their respects to a man who'd built an empire and a legacy. Alessandro delivered the eulogy with a strength that made Sophia proud, talking about his grandfather's wisdom, his fierce love for family, his belief that true wealth was measured in relationships, not bank accounts. And in that moment, watching her husband honor the man who'd orchestrated their meeting, Sophia sent up a silent thank you to Vittorio for seeing what they couldn't, for knowing that sometimes the best matches come from the most unexpected places. The contractions started on a Tuesday evening while they were having dinner. Sophia had just taken a bite of pasta when the first wave hit, strong enough to make her gasp and drop her fork. Alessandro was on his feet instantly, his face going pale. "Is it time? Are you okay? Should I call the doctor?" He was adorable in his panic. This man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, reduced to nervous energy by the prospect of becoming a father. Sophia breathed through the contraction, then smiled at him. "Yes, it's time. But we have hours yet. First babies always take a while. Why don't you grab the hospital bag while I finish eating? I'm going to need my strength." But of course, their baby had other ideas. The contractions came hard and fast, progressing much more quickly than expected. By the time they reached the hospital, Sophia was in active labor, her body taken over by forces beyond her control. Alessandro stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand, letting her squeeze until his bones ground together, whispering encouragement and love through every contraction. And when their daughter finally entered the world, screaming her displeasure at the bright lights and cold air, when the doctor placed the tiny, perfect bundle on Sophia's chest, they both broke down completely. "She's perfect," Alessandro said, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his daughter for the first time. "So perfect. What should we name her?" They'd discussed names, but never quite decided, wanting to see the baby before choosing. But now, looking at the tiny girl with a surprising amount of dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Sophia knew exactly what felt right. "Vittoria," she said. "After your grandfather. We'll call her Vittoria." Alessandro's face crumpled with emotion, and he leaned down to kiss Sophia's forehead, then gently touched his daughter's tiny hand. "Vittoria De Luca," he said. "Welcome to the world, little one. You have no idea how much you're already loved." The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Vittoria was a good baby, but she still woke every few hours to eat, and Sophia was recovering from childbirth, her body aching and strange. Alessandro was remarkable, completely devoted to both of them. He took paternity leave from his company, something unheard of for a CEO, and refused all work calls during the night feedings. He learned to change diapers and swaddle and soothe a crying baby with the same determination he'd applied to building his empire. And watching him with their daughter, seeing the tenderness in his eyes as he held the tiny girl, made Sophia fall even more deeply in love with him. They were sitting together one evening, Vittoria asleep in Sophia's arms after nursing. Alessandro's arm around her shoulders, both of them exhausted, but content. "Do you remember our wedding night?" Alessandro asked quietly. "When I told you we didn't have to do anything, that we could just sleep?" Sophia smiled at the memory. "I remember thinking you were either incredibly kind or completely uninterested." "Both," Alessandro admitted with a laugh. "I was trying to be decent. But I wanted you even then. I just didn't want to admit it to myself." "And now look at us," Sophia said, glancing down at the baby, at the life they'd built. "Who would have thought that cold contract would lead to this?" "I think my grandfather knew," Alessandro said. "I think he saw something in you, some quality that he knew I needed. He orchestrated this whole thing knowing exactly what would happen." Sophia considered that. "You really think he planned for us to fall in love?" "I think he hoped we would," Alessandro said. "He told me once, years ago after my engagement ended so badly, that the right person would come when I least expected it, that I'd recognize her because she wouldn't want anything from me except to be seen for who I really am. At the time, I thought he was being sentimental, foolish even. But he was right. You never wanted my money, or my name, or my power. You just wanted me." "That's not entirely true," Sophia pointed out with a soft laugh. "I did want your money, at least at first. I needed it to save Marco." Alessandro shrugged. "You wanted it for someone else, which is completely different. You were willing to sacrifice yourself for family, which just proved you were exactly the kind of person my grandfather knew I needed. Someone who understood that love and loyalty matter more than anything else." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their daughter sleep, both marveling at the miracle of her existence. Finally, Sophia spoke, voicing something she'd been thinking about. "Alessandro, what happened to our agreement? The one-year contract? The plan to divorce after we'd fulfilled the terms?" Alessandro turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "Do you want a divorce, Sophia? Is that what you're asking?" "No," she said quickly. "God, no. I just realized we never officially canceled the contract, never made this legally permanent. We should probably do that. Make sure everything is clear for Vittoria's sake, if nothing else." Alessandro was quiet for a moment, then carefully extricated himself from the couch and left the room. Sophia heard him moving around in his study, and when he returned, he was carrying a folder. He sat back down and opened it, revealing the contract they'd both signed, the document that had started this all. Without a word, he pulled out a lighter and held the flame to the corner of the contract. They watched together as it caught fire, as the words that had bound them in obligation turned to ash. "We don't need a contract," Alessandro said as the last of the paper burned in the ashtray he'd grabbed. "We have something much stronger. We have love. We have Vittoria. We have a life we built together. That's worth more than any legal document." Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. "You're such a romantic," she teased gently. "Who would have guessed?" "Only for you," he said, leaning in to kiss her softly. "Only ever for you." Life settled into a new rhythm. Sophia eventually went back to work part-time, needing the fulfillment that came from nursing, from helping people. Alessandro restructured his company, delegating more, creating space in his life for what really mattered. They hired a wonderful nanny, an older woman named Francesca, who Vittoria adored, which allowed them to still have date nights, to maintain the connection that had sparked between them. Vittoria grew, hitting all her milestones on time, developing a personality that was equal parts stubborn determination from her father and compassionate warmth from her mother. She had Alessandro wrapped around her tiny finger, and he spoiled her shamelessly, despite Sophia's protests that they needed to raise her with some sense of normal values. "How can I resist?" Alessandro would protest. "She smiles at me, and I'll give her anything she wants." "You're hopeless," Sophia would laugh, but secretly she loved seeing him so besotted with their daughter. On their first anniversary, Alessandro surprised Sophia with a trip back to Positano, to the villa where they'd been married the first time. They left Vittoria with Sophia's mother, who was thrilled to babysit, and spent 3 days just being a couple again, not parents, not busy professionals, just Alessandro and Sophia. On the evening of their anniversary, they dressed for dinner, Sophia in a flowing dress that made her feel beautiful, Alessandro in linen pants and a white shirt that reminded her of that morning after their first wedding, when she'd woken up disoriented in his penthouse. They walked down to the same beach where they'd honeymooned, where Alessandro had been so controlled, so determined to keep his distance. Now he held her hand openly, pulled her close, kissed her without restraint. They found a quiet spot on the sand, watching the sun set over the water in a spectacular display of orange and purple and gold. "Remember when we stood here a year ago?" Alessandro asked. "You were terrified of me. I was terrified of what I was feeling, and neither of us had any idea what we were doing." "I remember," Sophia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I remember thinking this was the most beautiful prison I'd ever seen." "And now?" Alessandro asked. "Now it's home," Sophia said simply. "Anywhere with you is home." Alessandro pulled her around to face him, and she saw that he looked nervous, almost shy, which was so unlike him that it made her heart skip. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I know we already exchanged anniversary gifts, but this is different. This is what I should have given you the first time if we'd married for the right reasons." He opened a small velvet box to reveal a ring, different from the one she wore, which had been chosen by his grandfather's jeweler. This one was clearly selected with care, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the sunset light and threw it back in brilliant green fire. "The emerald is the same color as the necklace from our wedding," Alessandro explained. "The one my grandmother wore. I had this made specially because green is your favorite color, because emeralds symbolize rebirth and new beginnings, and because you've given me both. Will you marry me again, Sophia? Not because of a contract or an arrangement, but because you love me and want to spend your life with me. Say yes to me one more time, but this time let it be only for love." Sophia was crying openly now, nodding before she could even form words. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, of course, yes." Alessandro slid the ring onto her finger next to her wedding band, and it fit perfectly, like it had always belonged there. Then he kissed her as the sun disappeared below the horizon, as the sky turned from gold to deep blue, as the first stars began to appear. They made love that night, with a passion that had only deepened over the year, knowing each other's bodies intimately now, knowing exactly how to touch, where to kiss, how to build the pleasure until it was almost unbearable. But there was also a tenderness, a reverence in how Alessandro touched her, like he was still amazed that she was his, that this was real. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the villa's master bedroom, Sophia traced lazy patterns on Alessandro's chest. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said no to your grandfather?" she asked. "If you'd refused to marry at all?" Alessandro caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "And it terrifies me, because I came so close to refusing. I almost told him it was too much to ask, that I wouldn't do it. If I had, I never would have met you, never would have found this happiness. It makes me believe in fate, in the idea that some things are meant to be." "I used to think I didn't believe in destiny," Sophia said. "I thought life was just random chance and hard work. But meeting you, falling in love like this, it's changed my mind. Maybe we were always supposed to find each other. Maybe all those circumstances that seemed so cruel were actually leading us exactly where we needed to be." They stayed in Positano for 3 more days, stealing time to just be together before returning to their busy lives. And when they flew back to Rome, back to Vittoria and responsibility and work, they did so as more than just husband and wife. They were partners, best friends, lovers, parents, all the things that made a real marriage, a real life together. Years passed, good years filled with laughter and love, and the occasional challenge that they faced together. Alessandro's company continued to grow, but he never lost sight of what mattered, always made time for family dinners and bedtime stories and weekend trips. Sophia became head nurse at her hospital, respected by colleagues and beloved by patients, finding a way to balance her calling with her family life. And Vittoria grew into a bright, confident child who had her father's business mind and her mother's compassionate heart. They had 2 more children, a son they named Roberto after Sophia's father, and another daughter they called Maria after the housekeeper who'd been so kind to Sophia from the beginning. The penthouse that had once felt like a museum became a real home, filled with children's laughter and scattered toys and the beautiful chaos of family life. Alessandro never did quite master the art of not spoiling his children, but Sophia balanced him out, making sure they understood the value of hard work and kindness. They taught them about both worlds, the privilege they'd been born into and the struggles others faced, raising them to be compassionate and aware. Sometimes, usually late at night after the children were asleep, Alessandro and Sophia would stand on the terrace where they'd first confessed their feelings, looking out at the city lights and marveling at how far they'd come. "Remember when you asked if I regretted it?" Alessandro would say. "Regretted what started all this?" Every single time, Sophia would smile and shake her head. "I could never regret anything that led me to you, to this life. Even the hard parts, the scary parts, they were worth it." Alessandro would pull her close, and they'd stand there in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd found their way to each other through the strangest circumstances and built something beautiful. On what would have been their 10th anniversary had they counted from the first wedding. Alessandro organized a massive party at the Positano villa. All their friends and family were there, Sophia's mother and brothers, the few business associates who'd become genuine friends, Maria, who was now retired, but still treated like family, and of course their 3 children running wild through the gardens. As the celebration wound down, as the sun set over the water in that way that never got old, no matter how many times they saw it, Alessandro stood to make a toast. He raised his glass, waiting for silence, his eyes finding Sophia across the crowded terrace. 10 years ago, he began, I made what I thought was a business decision. I agreed to marry a woman I'd never met to fulfill my grandfather's dying wish. I expected obligation, inconvenience, maybe mutual tolerance at best. He paused, his gaze never leaving Sophia's face. What I got instead was the greatest gift of my life. I got a partner who challenges me, who makes me want to be better, who reminds me every day what truly matters. I got the love of my life, the mother of my children, my best friend, my home. Sophia, you walked into my world and changed absolutely everything. You showed me that the tallest skyscraper, the biggest fortune, the most successful deal, none of it means anything compared to love, to family, to the simple joy of waking up next to the person who sees you completely and loves you anyway. His voice cracked slightly with emotion. So this toast isn't really about our anniversary. It's a thank you. Thank you for agreeing to that ridiculous arrangement. Thank you for taking a chance on a damaged, emotionally closed-off workaholic. Thank you for our beautiful children. For this incredible life. For every morning and every night and every moment in between. Thank you for being you, exactly as you are. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone, and I will spend the rest of my life grateful that you chose me. The guests applauded, many wiping at tears, but Alessandro only had eyes for Sophia as she crossed to him. She took the microphone from his hand, her own eyes wet. 10 years ago, she said, her voice strong and clear, I thought I was sacrificing myself for my family. I thought I was trading my freedom for my brother's life, entering into a loveless arrangement because I had no other choice. And in a way, I was right. I had no choice, but not because of circumstances, because of destiny. She looked around at the gathered friends and family, at their children who were watching with wide eyes, then back at Alessandro. I had no choice but to fall in love with this man. From the moment he gently moved that strand of hair from my face in a cafe in Soho, I was lost. He showed me kindness when he didn't have to, respect when it wasn't required, love when it wasn't part of our contract. Alessandro gave me everything I didn't know I needed. Security, yes, but more than that. He gave me partnership, equality, a voice in decisions, a seat at the table. He made me feel valued not for what I could give him, but for who I am. And together, we built this. She gestured around at their life, their family. A love that's real and deep and strong enough to weather anything. So my toast is this: to unexpected beginnings that lead to perfect endings, to contracts that become commitments, to business arrangements that transform into epic love stories, and most of all, to the man who promised to be gentle, but instead taught me to be brave, to my husband, my love, my everything, Alessandro. The applause this time was thunderous, and their children ran to them, wanting to be part of the moment. Alessandro and Sophia stood surrounded by family, holding each other and their kids, and in that moment, everything felt complete. Full, exactly as it should be. Later that night, after the guests had left, after the children were asleep in their rooms, Alessandro and Sophia walked down to the beach one more time. They'd done this on every anniversary, returning to where it all began, reconnecting with the young, uncertain people they'd been. The moon was full, painting a silver path across the dark water, and the air was warm and heavy with the scent of flowers. They walked in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, until they reached the spot where Alessandro had proposed the second time, where he'd given her the emerald ring that now sat next to a wedding band worn smooth by years of wear. "Do you remember," Sophia said softly, "that first night, when you saw the blood on the sheets? Do you remember how you looked at me like your whole world had shifted?" Alessandro pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her from behind, as they looked out at the moonlit sea. "I remember," he said against her hair. I remember feeling like I'd been struck by lightning, like everything I thought I knew about myself had been wrong. I remember realizing in that moment that I was in far deeper than I'd ever planned to be, that you'd already become essential to me. That was the moment I knew I was lost, Sophia admitted, when you looked at me with such raw emotion, such vulnerability. I realized you weren't the cold businessman I'd thought you were, that underneath all that control was a man who felt deeply, who cared intensely, who was just protecting himself from being hurt again. And I wanted to be the one who made it safe for you to feel, to love, to trust. You did, Alessandro said, turning her in his arms so they were face to face. You made everything safe, everything possible. You gave me a life worth living instead of just an empire worth building. They stood there for a long time, two people who'd found each other in the most improbable way, who'd built a love story from the foundation of a contract, who'd proven that sometimes the most transactional beginnings could lead to the most transformational endings. Above them, stars wheeled across the sky, indifferent to human dramas, eternal and unchanging. But for Alessandro and Sofia De Luca, standing on that beach in Positano, with 10 years of love behind them and a lifetime ahead, the universe felt personal, felt like it had conspired to bring them together, like every moment of pain and struggle and uncertainty had been necessary to lead them exactly here, to this perfect moment of complete understanding and acceptance. The story of Alessandro and Sofia isn't just about a billionaire and a nurse, about a contract that became a commitment, about an arrangement that transformed into authentic love. It's about the courage to be vulnerable, to let someone see you completely and trust they'll stay. It's about choosing each other every single day, not because you have to, but because you want to, because life is better together than apart. It's about building something real from unexpected materials, about finding home in another person rather than a place. Their love wasn't perfect. Nothing real ever is. They fought sometimes, disagreed about parenting or money or how to spend holidays. Alessandro could still be controlling, and Sofia could still be stubborn. But they always came back to each other, always chose connection over being right, always remembered what they'd built together and refused to let it crumble. And when their children asked years later how their parents fell in love, Alessandro and Sofia would exchange a look full of shared history and private jokes. "We made a deal," Alessandro would say with a smile. "Your mother agreed to marry me for very practical reasons." But somewhere between the contract and the commitment, Sofia would continue, "We found something neither of us expected. We found that love isn't always lightning and fireworks and instant recognition. Sometimes it's gentle, gradual, growing from friendship and respect into something deeper. Sometimes the best love stories start with the most unromantic beginnings." Their youngest daughter, practical like her mother, would always ask, "But weren't you scared? Taking such a risk on someone you barely knew?" And Sofia would pull Alessandro close and say, "Terrified." But sometimes being scared is how you know something matters. If it didn't scare me, it wouldn't be worth doing. And Alessandro would add, "The best things in life require courage. Loving your mother, building our family, choosing vulnerability over protection, these were the scariest and best decisions I ever made." If this story touched something in you, if you believe in second chances and unexpected love, in courage and vulnerability, and choosing to trust even when it's terrifying, then subscribe to this channel. Leave a like if you think the most beautiful love stories are the ones that grow from friendship, from mutual respect, from choosing each other every day. And tell me in the comments, do you believe in destiny? In the idea that some people are meant to find each other no matter how unlikely the circumstances. Your presence here, listening to this story, it means you understand that love isn't always easy or simple. That sometimes the best relationships require us to be brave, to take risks, to trust when trust feels impossible. And maybe this story speaks to the hope we all carry, that somewhere out there is someone who will see us completely, who will love us not despite our flaws, but because of our whole selves, someone who will choose us every single day. If you want early access to stories like this, become a channel member. And if this narrative truly moved you, if it reminded you of your own love story, or gave you hope for one to come, click the Super Thanks button. Your support allows us to continue creating these stories of love, hope, and transformation. Because in the end, we all deserve to find our person, our home, our safe place to be completely ourselves. And sometimes, just sometimes, they come from the most unexpected places, disguised as contracts and arrangements, but revealing themselves to be exactly what we needed all along. Alessandro and Sofia De Luca built their forever from a foundation of necessity, proving that love doesn't care about how it starts, only about where it leads. And where it led them was home, to each other, to a life richer than either could have imagined. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories don't begin with love at all. They begin with courage, with desperation, with impossible choices and uncertain futures. But they end with everything that matters, with partnership and passion, with family and forever, with the quiet certainty that you've found the one person in all the world who makes you whole. That's the story of how a billionaire who promised to be gentle discovered that gentleness was just the beginning, that what came after, the passion and commitment and deep, abiding love, that was the real gift. And a nurse who thought she was sacrificing herself learned that sometimes what looks like sacrifice is actually salvation, that sometimes losing yourself is how you find everything you never knew you needed. Their love story continues, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. And it will continue long after the sun sets on that beach in Positano, long after the stars fade and new ones are born. Because real love, the kind built on truth and trust and choosing each other through everything, that kind of love is eternal.